I was paying my family's bills for years. Then they kicked me out and demanded more, and then I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink when she said it. I just stood there in the kitchen doorway, holding a paper bag full of groceries I'd bought with my last $45, while my mom told me I was ungrateful like I had done something cruel. Her voice cut through the stale air like a blade, sharp with accusation, even though I hadn't said anything except, "Hi." She had that way of speaking, tight, clean, lethal, even when she was calm. But she wasn't calm this time. She was red-faced and trembling, like me bringing milk home was a personal attack. "You're ungrateful," she snapped, her words louder than the humming refrigerator. "You just barge in like you're owed something." Then she pointed toward the door like I was a stray dog she'd fed too long. "Get out, and don't bother coming back." I didn't move. Not because I was stunned, but because I wasn't. It felt predictable, like I'd seen this moment coming for months, and now that it was here, all I could think about was how I'd have to leave the eggs behind. Behind her, my father stood at the sink, rubbing his eyes like this whole conversation was a bad movie he'd seen too many times. He didn't say a single word. Didn't look at me. Didn't lift a finger. Just kept leaning on the counter, half turned away, like it wasn't his job to interfere. And across the living room, slouched on the couch in the same sweatpants I'd seen him wear every day that week, my brother didn't even glance up. Ty sat with his legs wide, scrolling his phone, one sock half off, eating chips I probably paid for. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Sunday. I'd come straight from work, smelling like hand sanitizer and exhaustion, wearing the same polo shirt I'd worn since Tuesday. The grocery bag was heavy: bread, canned soup, eggs, toilet paper, orange juice. Basic things they never seemed to have, yet always expected someone else to buy. That someone was always me. I'd been doing this for so long it didn't feel like kindness anymore. It was just what happened on Sundays. I worked. I shopped. I carried things into a house that had long stopped feeling like mine. No one ever asked. No one ever said thanks. I set the bag on the counter and looked around the house one last time. The same dent in the drywall near the hallway, the one time made with a picture frame 5 years ago and then blamed on the wind. The sagging recliner they bought secondhand and still called new. The pale green carpet I used to vacuum every Saturday while everyone else watched TV. I used to think being needed was the same as being loved. That if I just kept showing up, kept carrying more than my share, they'd see me. But they didn't. Not really. They saw what I did. They saw the money. They saw the groceries. They saw the rent payment I deposited into their account every other month. But they didn't see me. They never had. So I walked out. No one stopped me. Not my mom. Not my dad. Not even the boy I used to call my little brother, the one who got extra birthday cakes because of his asthma, the one who got out of everything because he was sensitive. The front door closed behind me with a thud so quiet it sounded rehearsed. I was 17 the first time I left, back when I still called it a break. Back when I told myself they didn't know how to show love, but deep down, they meant well. I moved into a basement unit with stained tiles and no stove, worked at a fast food drive-thru off Prairie Street, and learned to stretch a $10 bill across 4 days. They liked to say I was independent, but what they meant was that I didn't bother them, that I managed alone so they didn't have to feel guilty about it. We weren't broke exactly, just constantly short. Every month was tight, and every utility bill was treated like a surprise, even though it always came on the same day. The lights went off twice my junior year, once right before midterms. I studied at the 24-hour diner across the street from my job, nursing a refillable soda and acting like I wasn't embarrassed. I started working under the table at a bar when I was 16. I didn't tell anyone. They didn't ask. The owner knew I wasn't old enough to serve, but let me run plates and clean bathrooms anyway. It was the first time someone looked at me and saw use, not weakness. My mom never drove me. My dad never picked me up. But when I brought home a box of groceries, they'd say, "You didn't have to," in the same tone people used to guilt you for doing what they fully expected. By the time I graduated, I'd stacked up 3 part-time jobs, a scholarship offer, and stress so sharp it gave me stomach ulcers. They didn't come to the ceremony. They didn't even call. That was how things went. I handled things. They let me. Meanwhile, Ty crashed out of community college and blamed the registrar. Then he quit 2 part-time jobs in a row because they didn't understand how his brain worked. I once overheard my mom on the phone telling someone he was just taking a gap year to find himself. He's still taking it. He's 24. Still at home. Still figuring it out. My name doesn't come up in those conversations. I'm the quiet one, the capable one, the one who gets things done. They say it like it's a compliment, but it's not. It's a sentence. When the mortgage fell behind 2 years ago, my mom never said help. She just sighed and said, "Nina, we're a little tight this month." So I covered it. Then the water bill. Then the heating. Then groceries. Then again. Then again. Eventually, it became routine. She looked tired. I'd transfer money. No one said a word. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in like mold behind the walls, silent, dangerous, easy to ignore until it rots everything. I never got a thank you. Never got a single "we appreciate it." But if I skipped one week, if I didn't answer a call, suddenly I was selfish. Suddenly I didn't care. Last Sunday, when I walked in with that paper bag and saw the way they looked at me, as if I was intruding, as if I had dared to come back empty-handed, I realized something that had been building in the back of my mind for years. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a line item on their monthly survival plan. I wasn't someone they loved. I was someone they used. So I left. This time, I didn't pack a bag. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I just walked out with my wallet, my keys, and the bitter certainty that if I never came back, nothing would change. And the scariest part? That felt like relief. 3 months later, I stopped waking up feeling like I was bracing for impact. There was no yelling from down the hall, no slamming doors, no glares across the table during breakfast. The apartment above the old hardware store smelled like wood and coffee in the morning, and the only sound I ever heard through the paper-thin walls was a neighbor watching game shows with the volume too high. I didn't mind. I actually started to like the way silence felt, not like loneliness, but like a blanket I didn't have to share. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone a conversation just for existing. My mornings were quiet and slow. I kept my phone on silent and didn't check it unless I had to. Most days, I left it in a drawer and didn't miss it. No one from home had texted or called since the day I walked out, which both hurt and comforted me in equal measure. There was no apology, no effort. No one even asked if I had landed anywhere safely. But the freedom to wake up without obligation was something I hadn't realized I was starving for. I could drink coffee slowly, eat instant oatmeal while standing barefoot in the kitchen, listen to the radiator make its usual complaints, and not have to answer to anyone. I got a new job at a family-run bookstore that barely stayed in business thanks to a handful of loyal old customers and a cat that wandered in once a week like it owned the place. It didn't pay much, but it paid enough. I walked there every morning, past a church with a cracked steeple, a park where the swing chains creaked, and a diner that always smelled like burnt toast. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought myself a secondhand futon and a lamp shaped like a seashell. I painted the kitchen cabinets yellow because I wanted color. I could have painted them purple or green or any other color I wanted, and no one would have questioned it. That was the best part. I hadn't heard from them in 93 days when it finally happened. I was stocking a shelf of true crime paperbacks when my phone buzzed. I let it go the first time, figuring it was a spam call. But it buzzed again, then again, then again. I wiped my hands on my apron and pulled it out. One message. Just one. From Jack. I didn't even have his name saved anymore. It just said, "Why haven't you sent the mortgage this month?" No hello. No how are you. No mention of the 3 months that had passed without a word. I stood in the middle of the aisle and stared at the screen like it might blink and correct itself. I didn't answer right away. I didn't answer at all that day. I finished my shift, walked home slowly, and let the sky change colors behind me without rushing it. At home, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine, sat on the futon, and stared at the phone again. I left it face down on the counter for hours. No music, no TV, just the occasional hum of the fridge and the sound of a neighbor's dog barking 2 doors down. By the time I picked it up again, there were 4 more messages. 2 from my mother, 1 from Ty, and another from Jack. All of them were variations of the same tone. Blame wrapped in concern, guilt dressed as responsibility. My mother wrote, "The bank called. We're behind. How could you do this to us? Ty's message was exactly what I expected. So you're really going to let them lose the house just to prove a point? I stared at that one the longest. Because it was the most honest. That's what they thought this was. A tantrum. A move in a long game of family chess, where the queen had refused to sacrifice herself one more time. They didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't wonder if I was working. Didn't care whether I could afford to help. They just expected it, like a utility they forgot they weren't entitled to. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt done. Like something inside me had finally accepted that I wasn't missing anything by being gone. There wasn't love back there. Just an endless series of expectations held up by obligation and fear. I waited another hour before replying to Jack. One line. I thought I wasn't welcome anymore. That was all I wrote. I didn't add emotion. I didn't try to soften it. I let the weight of their words hang in the air on their own. Then I set the phone down and made dinner. Left the dishes in the sink just because I could. That's when it started, the flood. They must have still had the group thread going because within minutes, it was buzzing like someone had yanked the emergency alarm. Ty called. I didn't answer. My mom sent 4 texts in a row. Claire, answer your father. He's worried sick. We raised you better than this. You're acting out of spite. That last one hit differently. Spite. Not sacrifice. Not support. Not years of quiet giving. No, now it was spite. As if I had denied them something they were inherently owed. As if they had a right to my labor, my paycheck, my peace. Later that night, Ty left a voicemail. I let it ring out, then listened from a distance like I was eavesdropping on someone else's family. Claire, come on. This is serious. They're freaking out. The bank's getting involved. You need to fix this. That word again, fix. Like I broke something. Like the problem wasn't that they stopped paying bills the minute I left, but that I had stopped bailing them out. I deleted the voicemail. No hesitation. I'd heard everything I needed to hear the second he used the word you instead of we. The next morning, another message from my mother. This is tearing the family apart. I laughed. A dry, hollow laugh that felt too big for my body. Then Jack followed up. What kind of daughter does this to her parents? That one made me laugh harder, though not in a joyful way. More like a bark. More like a crack in the middle of a frozen lake. I could have written them a whole essay in response. About how I used to skip meals so they'd have food in the fridge. About how I canceled my own dentist appointments for 3 years straight so the water wouldn't be cut off. About how I let them tell the neighbor's Ty was between jobs when he hadn't even looked for one in months. But I didn't write any of that. I waited until the sun had fully risen. Until the sky stopped looking like ash, and then I sent one last message to the group thread. Not my problem anymore. I turned my phone face down again, muted the thread, and let the silence stretch. I didn't check for replies. I didn't listen to new voicemails. I just went on with my morning like I had no storm at my back. Because I finally understood something I hadn't been willing to admit. I wasn't abandoning them. I was just declining to be held hostage anymore. And there's a difference. A big one. I didn't think the silence would bother me. Not at first, not after everything. But silence has a weight no one really talks about. It creeps in slow and makes itself comfortable in the corners of your mind, pressing on your chest when the room is too still. Some nights, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling asking the same question I had buried months ago. Where did the money go? Not just the last payment I hadn't sent, but all the ones before it, all the transfers I made without hesitation, all the just this once deposits I stopped keeping track of when it became clear I was the only one keeping track at all. I didn't want to call the bank. I didn't want proof. I didn't want to confirm what I already knew deep down, because confirmation would make the betrayal real in a way I couldn't stuff back into the dark. But I did it anyway. One Wednesday morning, I made a cup of tea I didn't finish and called the mortgage office. The woman who answered had a friendly voice and a small-town accent that made the conversation feel less like a confrontation and more like an errand. She asked me for the account number, some ID verification, and then went quiet for longer than I liked. When she returned, her tone had changed, not cold, but cautious. Looks like the automatic payments from your account stopped about 7 months ago, she said, like she was reading me news I should have known already. I blinked hard. Sorry, stopped? She repeated herself slowly, clearly, like maybe I didn't understand. The last full payment we received from your bank account was 7 months ago. Since then, only a few partial payments have been submitted. The account is currently in pre-foreclosure status. I wrote it down. Pre-foreclosure. A word I'd never used, but now belonged to me in a way I didn't ask for. I hung up, closed my eyes, and stood perfectly still in the middle of the kitchen. The radiator let out a hiss like it was judging me. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel rage. I just felt heavy, like my bones had soaked up all the disappointment and were now holding it in place. I opened my banking app and scrolled through months of transfers, amounts I could barely afford, all labeled utilities, groceries, rent, support. Thousands of dollars. Gone. Not to keep the lights on, not to keep the roof steady, but somewhere else. Somewhere no one wanted to talk about. I thought back to little things I'd noticed without noticing. The new recliner in the corner of the living room, the one my mom called a steal. The brand new flat screen mounted above the fireplace with speakers they said were on sale. The sudden shift in the pantry, snacks they'd never been able to afford when I lived there now seemed to be stocked like a showroom. I had seen it all. I had walked past it, stepped over it, and never questioned a thing. Because questioning would have meant stepping out of the role they'd handed me. The good daughter, the reliable one, the fixer. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to yell. I just wanted the truth. And when you finally get tired of carrying the weight of silence, asking directly becomes the only way forward. So I called Ty. He picked up fast, too fast. His voice was already defensive, like he'd been waiting on this conversation, like he knew it was inevitable and hoped he could spin it fast enough to avoid fallout. He launched right in, saying Mom hadn't slept in days, Dad was not himself, the bank had called twice that morning. He said it all like I was the one who dropped the match, not the one who spent years keeping the fire from catching. I waited until he ran out of steam. Then I asked, flat and quiet, what happened to the money I sent every month? There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone's thinking, but the kind where someone's already building the lie in real time. He said they used it for groceries, some car repairs, a plumbing issue, other things that came up. He said it with the tiredness of someone used to not being questioned. Like the idea of accountability was an inconvenience, not a requirement. I let him finish. Then I asked again, sharper this time. You knew the mortgage wasn't being paid, didn't you? He didn't deny it. Not really. He didn't answer either. He let out this long, familiar sigh. The one I remembered from every time he got caught skipping school or lying about job interviews. The sigh that said, yeah, and I was hoping you'd never ask. That was all I needed. I thanked him, not because I felt grateful, but because I needed a clean ending. Then I hung up. That night, Lena called. I didn't answer. She tried again. I picked up, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she slipped into that voice she always used when she knew she'd been caught, but refused to admit it. The one full of forced calm, like she could gaslight her way into my forgiveness if she just kept talking long enough. She said I had embarrassed them by calling the bank, that I was making things worse, that families don't handle things like this with phone calls and bank reps and finger pointing. I let her talk. I wanted to hear just how far she'd go to avoid saying the one thing that mattered. We lied to you. Eventually, Jack got on the phone. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He just asked if I could help them get caught up, just for now, just until things stabilized. That's when I realized what was really happening. They weren't sorry. They were scared. And scared people don't apologize, they negotiate. So I said, without hesitation, sell the house. There was silence. Then came the disbelief. Both of them, speaking over each other, said I couldn't mean that it was still my home, that I was being dramatic. But it wasn't, and it hadn't been for a long time. I told them again, sell it. I hung up before they could start the next guilt trip. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages, long, desperate voicemails, furious texts, carefully crafted sentences pretending to be calm. I didn't read any of them. I didn't have to. I already knew what they'd say, that I was heartless, that I had turned my back on family, that they had always done their best. But I hadn't turned my back. They had. The moment my wallet stopped showing up, so did their version of love. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their ATM. And when the machine stopped working, they panicked. I made coffee, sat at my tiny kitchen table, and watched the steam curl up like it was trying to spell out all the things I'd never get to say. Then I opened the old family group thread, the one we used to plan birthdays and dinners and grocery lists I always ended up covering. I didn't say anything. I didn't explain. I just changed the group name to closed account, muted it, archived it, and deleted every number. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I was done renting space in my life to people who saw me as nothing but a resource. I noticed a white envelope on my doorstep the next morning. My name on the front in my mother's handwriting, still neat despite everything. I held it for a minute, thought about opening it, then dropped it straight into the trash. No drama, no second thoughts. Just a piece of paper I didn't ask for going exactly where it belonged. And when I closed the lid on that trash can, something in me felt lighter. Not free, not healed, but lighter. And sometimes that's the first step toward peace. Letting go of what never held you to begin with. I thought the worst had already passed, that silence would be the final chapter, but some people can't leave things broken if they aren't the ones who did the breaking. It took 2 weeks after the last call before Ty finally showed up outside my building. He didn't knock. He just texted me. Outside. I looked out the window and saw him sitting on the hood of his car, hoodie up, looking like he'd been practicing some kind of performance in the mirror before showing up. I didn't want to go down, but curiosity won out over self-preservation. I took the stairs slowly, knowing he wasn't there for conversation. He was there for damage control. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me like I'd betrayed him personally. Then he asked if I had any idea what I'd done to them. I let the silence stretch. He was the one standing on my doorstep after months of apathy, after years of passive dependence disguised as family unity. I asked him flatly if they were selling the house. He said they were trying to explore other options. When I asked what that meant, he shrugged and said, "We're figuring it out." I almost laughed. That phrase had followed him around like a shadow since he dropped out of his second college program. He said Lena was spiraling and Jack had stopped answering the phone. He said the bank was tightening its deadline and that if I didn't help now, they'd lose everything. I reminded him that I hadn't owned any of it to begin with, that I had been subsidizing their irresponsibility, not building equity in the house. That part made him mad. He said it wasn't about money, that it was about what we owe each other. I told him I agreed, and that they had owed me honesty, owed me appreciation, owed me basic decency, and still hadn't delivered. That shut him up for a minute. Then he played the last card they had left, the family card. He said I was being cold, that I was acting like a stranger, that I had cut them off without even giving them a chance to explain. I reminded him that they had 3 months of total silence to reach out, and not once did any of them check in. Not once did they ask if I was alive or safe, or even angry. They just waited for the payments to stop and then started screaming like someone had stolen from them. I told him they didn't miss me, they missed what I gave them. And those are not the same thing. After he left, I expected things to cool down. Instead, the opposite happened. The group thread lit up again, but this time it wasn't just family. It was extended relatives, old neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They were all parroting the same script, that I was the glue, that I needed to make things right, that the house was part of our legacy, and I couldn't just let it fall apart. One message actually said, "Think about your future nieces and nephews, like the mortgage would somehow be inherited like a family heirloom." I didn't respond to any of them. I just kept muting threads and deleting names. But the part that really broke something loose in me came next. I got an email from an old friend of Lena's, someone I barely remembered from childhood, who said she heard things had been tense and wanted me to know that Lena was just under a lot of pressure. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Pressure. As if years of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation could be reduced to pressure. As if lying to me wasn't intentional. As if pretending the mortgage was being handled when they were blowing the money on new furniture was just a side effect of stress. That was the day I stopped giving them even the benefit of the doubt. I used to think they were just bad at expressing love, that maybe I was the problem for needing things they didn't know how to give. But now I saw it clearly. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted compliance. They wanted me to fall back in line because that was easier than owning the choices they made. Every dollar I sent bought them more time to avoid responsibility. And now that the money was gone, the truth was showing up whether they invited it or not. The bank officially sent them a foreclosure notice 1 week later. I didn't find out through them. I found out through an old co-worker of Jack's who saw him crying in the parking lot behind the hardware store and felt compelled to send me a message on Facebook. That's how backward all of this had become. Strangers told me the truth. Family only called when they wanted something. The next day, Ty tried again, this time pretending like everything was fine. He sent a photo of the house when we were kids. Us in the front yard with plastic cups, Lena and sunglasses. Jack smiling like he hadn't already been halfway out the door. I didn't answer. I just stared at the photo until it blurred in my eyes and then deleted it. I didn't need a reminder of what was lost. I'd been mourning that version of my family since I was 17. The version they kept trying to sell me was a rerun of a sitcom I no longer found entertaining. What they wanted was my guilt, not my help. But guilt had no grip on me anymore. They'd squeezed that sponge dry years ago. Now they were left with nothing but the echo of their own demands. One night, I walked past the old house just to see it one more time. The yard was overgrown, the porch light was out, and the windows were all dark like even the place itself had stopped trying. There was a for sale by owner sign in the lawn, the kind you print at home because the realtors won't touch it. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. Like whatever energy had connected me to that place had snapped clean. I stood on the sidewalk long enough for the street light to flicker on above me, then turned around and walked home without looking back. Later that week, I got one last envelope in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Lena's handwriting immediately. Inside was a typed letter, 2 pages, mostly rambling about how families should stick together, how hurt she was, how betrayed they felt, how hard they'd worked to keep everything afloat. She didn't mention the lies. She didn't admit the money was misused. She didn't apologize. The closest she got was a single line. We didn't handle everything perfectly, but we did our best. I folded the letter neatly and dropped it into the recycling bin without reading the rest. Their best wasn't enough, and I didn't owe them more chances to prove it. I poured myself a cup of tea, pulled a blanket over my knees, and opened the windows just enough to let the air in. The silence in my apartment didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Like peace finally decided I was worthy of it. I used to think walking away from family made you cold, but now I know better. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you free. And I'd take freedom over false loyalty every single time. I thought that was it, truly, that the story had already burned itself out. But like most endings, the final blow didn't come from anger. It came from desperation wearing the costume of regret. 3 months after they stopped calling, I got a message that made my skin go cold. Not from fear, but from recognition. It was from Lena again. Only this time there was no script, no bargaining, no guilt-laced plea. Just one line. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. I didn't respond. I didn't even consider it. Because by then, I understood what they meant every time they said family. They meant obedience. They meant compliance. They meant silence. They didn't want connection. They wanted control. And when that control slipped away, they dressed up their panic in forgiveness and hoped I'd come crawling back. But I wasn't crawling. I was standing for the first time in years. I stayed quiet. And in that silence, something surprising happened. I started to heal. Not in dramatic ways, not in scenes worth sharing in group therapy or novels, but in the quiet moments that used to feel like waiting rooms. I went whole days without thinking about the house. I cooked without rationing ingredients. I took long showers without worrying about the water bill. I even laughed once, genuinely, unexpectedly, because someone on the sidewalk dropped their groceries and instead of panicking, they started clapping and bowed to the crowd that didn't exist. It wasn't a big life. It wasn't some glorious reinvention, but it was mine. And more than that, it was enough. I stopped apologizing for that. Stopped trying to fill the parts of myself they'd hollowed out with all their need. I stopped believing that being available was the same as being loved. I stopped calling that house home, even in my own head. I stopped feeling ashamed for leaving and started asking myself why I stayed so long. Then, one afternoon, something shifted again. I got a call from Ty, voicemail only. He said the house was gone. They couldn't afford the repairs the city required to keep it on the market. Some pipes burst. A wall cracked. Mold spread through the back hallway. No buyer wanted it. The bank took it. He didn't sound sad. He sounded hollow, like someone who had just learned that safety nets can vanish when you stand on them too long without checking if they're torn. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it, because it wasn't mine to hold. Not anymore. That house, those problems, that weight, they had been mine once, sure, but only because I let them be. I let myself become the plug in the leak, the patch in the roof, the light bulb no one replaced. I let myself become a version of family that could only exist if I never said no. But I had said no, and I meant it. A few weeks later, I got an email from a distant relative, someone I hadn't heard from since I was 13. They said they'd heard what happened, and they hoped I'd reconnect with Lena and Jack now that the dust is settled. That phrase made me laugh out loud in my apartment, startling my neighbor's cat through the open window. The dust hadn't settled. The dust had always been there. I just finally stopped sweeping it into corners to make everything look clean. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Some people spend their entire lives confusing guilt for loyalty, sacrifice for love, and silence for peace. I had done all three, and I was done. The truth was never that I stopped loving them. It was that they only loved the version of me who didn't need anything. The version who smiled while empty. The version who showed up, shut up, and paid the bills without asking why she had to. I buried that version, and I mourned her quietly, alone, with more grace than she ever got from the people she broke herself to help. Now when I think of that house, I don't feel warmth or anger. I just feel distance. Like something that once seemed so close I couldn't breathe is now just a landmark I passed on my way to becoming someone new. I still have bad days. I still wonder what might have happened if they had said sorry the first time instead of the 50th. I still wonder if they tell the story differently, if I'm the villain in a version of events where they forget how much I gave. But I don't chase that version. I let it live somewhere far from me, in the mouths of people who never saw me clearly to begin with. Because I saw me, and I chose me. Finally. And I hope if you're reading this, if any of this sounds familiar, you choose you too. You don't need permission. You don't need a dramatic exit. You just need to stop pretending that being used is a kind of love story. Walk away if you have to. And don't look back unless it's to remind yourself how far you've come.